The red, white, and blue balloon logo is as synonymous to real estate as the apple with the bite out of it is to technology and the golden arches are to hamburgers. Welcome, folks, to Hitting Home. I'm Arif Khan. With me is my co-host, Mike Montague, and we're joined today by Heidi Kostyra, who is the broker of Remax Crosstown Realty. Thank you for joining us, Heidi.
You're very welcome.
How are we doing, Heidi?
Good, thanks.
So, Heidi, Remax Canada, you were telling us, recently asked its brokers and agents in a poll to share the top most important, most pressing questions
Yes.
facing
Most frequently asked
asked questions facing buyers.
Yes.
And we thought that we would talk about that. These are questions asked by the buyers, and we'd like to offer some reassurance, some surety. We want our viewers at home to know that the questions maybe that they're asking in their own minds around the dinner table are shared by the public in general.
They usually are.
So, but before we get into that, what I thought would be good is just let our audience know a little bit about who you are, where you came from, why you decided to get into real estate, that type of thing.
Well, real estate wasn't something that you kind of just go, hey, when I grow up, I want to be a real estate agent. So my family, I'm one of 10 kids and one of the oldest, and my family purchased a home when I was about 14. They moved, and they just had everything go from bad to worse. So everything that could happen, happened. Septic overflowed a week later, well dried up, different things like that. And so it was pretty heartbreaking for my family. And as they further looked into it, they weren't represented well. So the realtor who was representing them did not do a good job. So that's something that kind of stuck with me as I got older, and not that much older. I was 22 when I decided to get into it, and I've been doing it ever since.
Excellent.
So we have, we were talking just before the show, and I told you, we both have a very similar experience or similar background, and I actually like that, working with professionals in the field who what their purpose was, what their motivation is to get into that field.
Yeah.
For me, it was, I was in the middle of changing careers. This is 20 years ago, and I had the absolute worst experience as well. I was taken advantage of, or I felt that I was taken advantage of, because those who had the knowledge of the industry decided that I was a good prey, that they could make some really good fees and commissions off of. And it wasn't until after the transaction that I found out that I could have made some moves that would have saved me tens of thousands of dollars. So I know what you're saying, and I appreciate that motivation, and I hope that that is able to convey today through to our audience that the guidance that we bring and the people that you work with should be relatable.
Well, we have a responsibility. We're the ones that are putting ourselves out there as the professional. So if we're the professional, then we need to know what we're talking about.
Exactly.
You know?
And it ties right in with our first question on the list here that we got for today, which is, I'm buying my first home. Where do I start?
Well, you don't start by going looking at houses.
Thank you very much.
You start.
Checks in the mail.
Yes, yes.
That's where most want to start.
Yes, and I understand, because you're super excited, you are anxious, you are in the place where you're, okay, I'm ready, I want to buy a house, and that's
being ready mentally and being ready financially are two different
totally different things.
So you told us where not to start. You don't start by going and looking for a house. Why is that?
You don't, because you get your hopes up and you're setting yourself up for disappointment, and that's the last thing that you want to do, because this is supposed to be a positive experience. This is supposed to be something that's exciting and fun. It's a life thing. It's something people go for. And so financing is the very most important number one step. Find out, go speak to your mortgage broker, find out what can you afford comfortably. And just because you're given that, wonderful number of your top limit, just make sure it matches up with your life and your goals, and then after you find that out,
know what your limit is to stay within, and oftentimes you go in and you find out that bar is a little higher than you thought it is.
Absolutely.
But it's you definitely need to know, kind of like, don't grocery shop when you're hungry.
When you're hungry.
Exactly. And
Know
make
where you're at
sure
you get
that the
out there.
mortgage person that you're dealing with has all of the facts.
So let me ask you this then, Heidi. Real estate is a very, very tough and competitive market.
Yes, it is.
And a client or a potential client comes to you and says, hey, I want you to help me buy a house or find a house. And here you are telling them, no, 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 we're not going to go house shopping yet.
Yeah.
And you've now instantly, I don't want to say burst their bubble,
Yeah.
but do you run the risk as a broker telling them or as an agent saying, no, I'm not going to help you go buy a house just yet because we're going to talk about the boring details first? Do you run the risk of them going elsewhere?
I think it's all in the way that you share it with them, the way that you deliver the information. So for me personally, my suggestion, and to the realtors who are with me, I would say sit down with them and educate them. But you can still be excited. It's just a process, and all you're doing is really teaching them through the process so that they understand what they're doing and they don't feel like, you know, maybe my parents felt or your family felt. They don't feel that they're kind of just trusting blindly. You know, educate them.
The client's not a commission check.
Yeah, they're not. It's, you know, don't be a one-hit wonder.
So let's start. Let's start from the end and actually work backwards, because when you actually do have an offer on the table, you may only have 5 days condition of financing, and depending on what their situation is from a financing side of things, that may not be enough time. So I understand why you're doing that.
Yeah, and I think the answer to that is, to sum it up, get your pre-approval, but it's also underlying that is have a good professional helping you out, working with you, and I think that can be said for all the questions that are on this list. And we'll come to number 2, which is, what is the best time of year, if there is a best time of year, price-wise, to buy a home?
Well, I think it depends on the personal situation of the person, of the individual buying the home. I think it depends on where they're at. You know, they might have a great situation where right now is the perfect time for them, no matter what time of year it is. And then there might be a spot where, you know, people always look at the market, no, it's a buyer's market, it's a seller's market. And yes, that comes into effect, but it also depends on the individual. You know, you do the spring in March where people are all excited and putting their homes up for sale. They might have some more choice in that time of year.
There's more choice.
But
there's more buyers in the market.
But there's more buyers.
There is that sweet spot, and we're kind of in it right now.
Yes.
And it seems before we get busy with sellers putting their homes on the market, a few weeks prior to that, which is kind of we're in the middle of right now, the buyers seem to come out. It's like right after Groundhog Day, all the new buyers see their shadow and they come out. They're looking. So that's the sweet spot where you have buyers, but you don't have a lot of inventory.
Right.
That's the sweet spot for the seller. Now, when you get into the busier market in the spring where there's a lot more inventory, if you're still looking as a buyer at that point, there's a lot more competition to sell. So looking at how long a home's been on the market, I think, is as important as any other thing, because that will determine the potential for negotiating strength as a buyer.
For sure, for sure. And right now, I think the general public would be surprised to hear in the last 2 weeks in our office alone, there have been quite a few multiple offers. And I don't think that that's going to happen as much when there's more inventory, but right at this exact moment, sellers are happy
inventory
because
levels are still low.
Exactly.
So we're going to go to a break in just a second, and when we come back, though, I want you to pick up on that thought, because I want you to differentiate between the real estate agents and the business professionals in real estate conditioning the public as to when the right time is and when the right time isn't, versus what you touched on, which is, let's assess your individual needs.
Right.
Just because the market's hot right now, or just because traditionally it's this right time to buy or sell, does it fit your needs?
Exactly.
So, you know what? Give us a little bit. Give us a bit of a soundbite on that, and then we'll pick it up after the break. But
I would say, don't ever get caught up in that, you know, old school, this is a great deal, you have to jump now. If you don't, you're going to miss the boat. Never listen to that. That's usually when I would say stop, re-evaluate the situation, and don't be put in a desperate situation. Never feel pressured, because there's always another house, there's always another deal. And usually it ends up being better, not worse.
Good. We'll pick up on that when we come back from the break. Welcome back to Hitting Home. I'm Arif Khan, Mike Montague, and with us is Heidi Kostyra of Remax Crosstown Realty. And what we were talking about just before the break was, while the market may decide that there are good times to buy or when the market's hot and not, you made a very clear point to say that everybody's personal situation, individual situation
Yeah.
is different, and that should be what you're following in terms of whether you get into the market or not. Maybe you want to pick up on that.
Yeah, for sure. You don't want to feel pressured to jump onto the bandwagon of what the media and everybody else is saying. Do what's right for you, because you make a mistake. That's when you make mistakes, is when you put yourself in that pressure. It's
So
not
buyer's
necessary.
remorse.
There's always a house to buy.
Absolutely. And when we look at it from a financing side of things, I mean, our responsibility is not just to try to get you into that home.
Right.
It reminds me of sort of the cliched used car salesman approach of whatever decade that might have been. What's it going to take for me to get you into
Yes.
this car? We have a responsibility to make sure that not only are you getting in, but you're making your next month payment and it fits within your budget, et cetera, and that you're happy.
This is a huge life decision for people. This is something this decision will impact their life for a long time, their
And
future.
give yourself, allot yourself a good period of time so that you don't find yourself under pressure, having to, make a decision within 30 days or something. Start
Absolutely.
6 months to a year before.
Yeah.
And again, sit down with the financial advisor, know where you are financially, begin to educate yourself on the market and what's out there, so that when you do see a house you like, you have a good sense of whether that's overpriced, a good deal,
Right.
whatever, it's in the neighborhood you want, but take your time and plan it. So if you want to time it to that you sell and buy while your kids are out of school,
Yeah.
then maybe in the fall before that you should be starting to educate yourself.
Absolutely.
And, get your
And
ducks
have
lined
fun.
up.
Have
Yeah,
fun
and
with
have
it.
fun.
Have fun with
So
it.
now
Exactly.
you've got your pre-approval.
Yes.
And you've gone around and you found the home. Two things that I think we should talk about is one, how to scratch homes off that list.
Yes.
All right, so you're not settling. But secondly, how much is it actually, outside of the sticker price of the house, what's actually involved in the price of the house and the transaction?
That's
in
the next
general?
question on the list, isn't it?
Isn't
Nice
it amazing
segue.
how that worked?
I'm impressed.
You teed that right up.
Wow, you're
Okay.
smooth.
Uh-huh.
Well, as far as the extra costs that are involved, I think nobody likes surprises with money.
Right.
Nobody likes, because they're not usually good surprises.
No.
So I think that whoever you hire, the professional that you're working with, in both the real estate and the mortgage side of things, you really need to make sure that you sit down and put down the numbers, make a list, and know that you're going to have your closing costs, which involve your lawyer's fees, your land transfer tax, your moving expenses, whatever they may be. If you're buying and you're selling something at the same time, then if there's a penalty on your mortgage, you got to think about that. So, and the one big thing that most people, the commission, if you're selling, not if you're buying, but people forget there's HST.
Yes.
And HST is a lot of money when you're talking about those kind of
On
figures.
hundreds of thousands of dollars, 13% adds up.
Well, yeah,
Absolutely.
so for the lawyer's fees, for the commission.
Not on the sale of the
No,
No,
not
no,
on the
but
home.
on the services you're
Yes,
But it adds
on the
up.
services.
Yes. And it comes back to something Arif and I have talked about right from show one, is putting together that team and having a good team.
Yes.
So establishing what your costs are going to be means having those conversations with that team, be it the lawyer, the home inspector,
Yes.
the lender, the real estate agent. And that should be one of the key questions you're asking them is, what is this going to cost me when we're at the end of it all? And
Yeah.
put that list together. So know when you get to the end of the closing of your home, know where you are financially and what money. When you think you might have a bunch of money left over from your last sale to go to this or that, and then you find out, oh, well, there was this closing cost, there was that.
$1,000 here and $1,000 there adds up.
Well,
Yeah.
property taxes is a big one, actually, thinking about that. That's one that doesn't get mentioned very often, is when you're closing, if the seller has prepaid the property taxes for the next couple months because
Yeah.
the bill had come in, you have to pay that on closing. So that might be another $1,500
Well,
that you
in
weren't
addition
expecting.
to that, if you're getting financing, the bank may request a holdback to make sure that your interim
Right.
tax bill is paid up front.
Right.
Because if they're taking months out of a portion, 1/12 of your taxes every month, they need a buffer to start with.
Yeah.
So you can expect a couple $1,000 surprise
Yeah.
at closing.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't be settling where you have to the exact penny available to you.
Yeah,
That's
and
right.
outside
closing.
of extenuating circumstances that might be involved in a closing, on average for a $500,000 home in Ontario, you're looking at $5,000 to $6,000, a little bit more, a little bit less on average
Yeah.
as your closing costs, in addition to your down payment that you're
Yes.
putting on
Our
your
banks,
house.
our
So-
banks always put in the contract that they want to see that you have 1.5% of
Yes.
the purchase price set
Right.
aside. So that might be a little bit more. Question for you though, given the fact that nobody knew what this market was going to do last year, I mean, I think some of us did, some of us said just settle
Some of us
down.
will
Yes.
say we did, but nobody knew for certain.
Well,
Not to
you know
the
what,
extreme.
though? Not to the extreme.
Not to the extreme.
And a lot of us said, you know what, this is just not sustainable. So relax, take a breath,
Yeah.
and it'll pass. But given the fact that the house prices did fluctuate so much, are you seeing more and more transactions where it's on a purchase, even if it's on a new build or whatever, that they're asking for an appraisal?
Absolutely. They're not even just asking for appraisals. We were in a little bit of a time last year where there was no conditions, nothing. And that caused some issues after the fact. People were just going to win. And, you know, and they were kind of being put into that no choice.
And that bothered me. That was scary. And some agents
it-
were even saying, don't bring me any offers without a condition. And the problem with that is you firm up on a deal, and
That
then in
can't
the
close.
week prior to closing,
Right.
They want to do a reappraisal on the house. They want to do a reappraisal on the purchaser,
Yeah.
or reassessment of the purchaser, and find out things have changed. Now you have a firm deal. Now this domino effect is happening because that person is also firmed up on their house, and the person who owned that house is firmed up on the next. And this was happening.
Well-
and that's when you start to see lawsuits. So you need those conditions
Yeah,
in there
coming
to
from a
protect
brokerage
yourself.
side of things, it kept me busy.
Yeah.
Working with all
For
of
sure.
the different realtors and their deals. There absolutely were in very many deals
Yeah.
that did not close.
Don't compromise.
There was a lot.
As a buyer, I would say don't compromise on protecting yourself by removing conditions just to make a deal work in any type of
Right,
market.
and if you're working with a realtor who is smart and who is really doing their homework on the situation, they will have prepared you, and that takes us back to when we started. What do you do at the beginning? At the beginning, you make sure that you've done your homework, because then you don't run into that. And maybe you can go in with shorter conditional periods because you've done your homework.
Yes.
You know, and
Okay.
you have more of a fighting chance.
So we've got just a minute and a half before we go to break. Let's touch on that one thing about not settling for the house. So the buyer comes in and says, I want to buy a house. Do you ask them, you know, what are you looking for in a home? And how many people are tempted to say, well, that one's pretty nice, and do you let them go for the one that's pretty nice, or what do you do?
Well, because I sit down with them first and recommend that that's what everybody does, I would have a wish list already.
Okay.
So I would already have a wish list of what they're looking for, regardless of price. And then we narrow it down and get as close as we can to that wish list. Because then they have clear, you know, we talk about, do you want a 2-car garage, a 1-car garage, a good lot, a fenced yard, an ensuite. You've already had that discussion, so that's already happened.
There
so
is
they're
no
not
perfect home.
No,
You want to
there-
come as close as you can, and there'll be compromises that made along
Yeah,
the way.
but you still want the
Sacrifice one thing
person.
for another.
Absolutely, but you still want the person to still have that, you know, feeling, still
Yes.
have that excitement.
Oh, yeah.
Because
For
it's
sure.
exciting.
It is
right?
exciting.
Yeah, and you still
And
want
when-
that.
And so when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about actually the difference in your thought process between buying a home that is going to be your home as
Yes.
opposed to a house, all right? So buying the home that you're going to have your family in perhaps, versus buying an investment property, and what is the different thought process that buyer, especially if it's a first-time investor, should be looking at. So when we come back from the
Perfect.
break, we will discuss more of these questions. They're fascinating, but I hope that you at home realize the consistency here is about putting together a really good team, a team that knows the industry, that knows the market, that will give you good guidance and help you through the process. So when we come back to Hitting Home.
Hi, and welcome back to Hitting Home. I'm Mike Montague, here with Arif and Heidi Kostyra of Remax Crosstown Realty in Barrie and Thornton, Simcoe County wide
Yes.
actually. And we were talking about, at the end, just before the last break, the different approach to an investment property as you might have towards buying that house that you're going to live in, be it the house
The
you're gonna
forever
live
home?
in forever home or that stepping stone home, but there's a different approach to each of them. Maybe we can quickly touch on all of them.
Sure. When you're buying your forever home, that's pretty much your personal home that you're going to be living in, family home. that's what we've pretty much been talking about and focusing on. As far as the investment side of things, it's very different. It's different whether it's a seasoned investor or a first-time investor.
The homework is certainly different.
Totally different. So it's a real learning process, and it's, you should work with somebody who's been through that process, from the professional side of things.
Yeah.
So as far as a first-time investor, it would be something that you really need to understand what you're getting into and all of the goods, the bads, the consequences, the pluses, just everything, right?
Yeah.
Do your homework with that. As far as a seasoned investor, it's much less emotional.
Yes.
So from the seller side of things, don't be offended if they're bringing in a lower offer or they're not as quite attached. They don't always necessarily get back to you in the irrevocable times as they always should, because for them, it's an investment.
Yeah.
So it's not emotional at all. They are not buying your home because they're in love with it. They're buying their home because
they see potential.
They see potential. It's a return on investment. It serves their purpose. It's part of their
we
portfolio.
could go on for many episodes talking about what constitutes a good versus average or poor investment.
Absolutely.
But the investor buyer is looking at how old's the roof? When am I going to be replacing the furnace?
Emotion.
All of these types of things. And maybe they see potential coming in with a slightly lower bid because they have contractors of their own and they can...
Some of them don't care if it needs a new roof. The $5,000 or $6,000 for a new roof isn't really as much of an impact because usually they should be, if they're an investor, have some capital. They should have some available money to do these type of things, and they sometimes are looking for the house that isn't perfect.
And it's not necessarily the investment potential is there and in your face, is they know to create that investment.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is.
Within that home. And on the other side of it, and one of the questions on the list is, should I... Threw me off there.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But go
You
ahead.
pointed down
Go
here,
with
but
it.
did we not just cover this?
Well, we kind of covered it.
Kind of covered it, so I'm going right up to this one.
But let's ask that question though. What are the best homes
Is
for
the
an
camera
investment?
still rolling?
Yeah, the camera's still rolling.
camera
It's
still
okay.
rolling?
What are the best homes for an investment?
The best homes for an investment, that can vary. It depends on the investor and their own financial situation. So I know for myself, when I was buying investment properties, I looked for the rundown properties, the ones that nobody else noticed the potential. People didn't see it. They didn't, it might have had that basement apartment, but it was not legal yet, and people thought it could never be legal. And I'm going to be honest, I remember purchasing one, and there was a realtor who said, nope, can't be legal. They hadn't done their homework because 3 months later it was legal.
Well,
So
we've talked about this on previous shows, and it's more and more the trend and more the necessity for a lot of people creating a second income stream in order to get into a home.
Right. And you got to
prices
remember
aside
there's different ways to do it. There's some new rules that we have in effect, but then there's also the grandfathering rules, which is another show. And so I would look for those type of potentials. Now, the other side of it is you might have an investor who wants the perfect home with zero money to put into it. They just want a turnkey. Maybe they live far out of town. Maybe they have a property management company. So for them, they're not looking for the fixer-upper. They're looking for the one that's turnkey, ready to go, add to their portfolio.
I think this is another show, though. I think we could probably fill another show with that. So let's move on.
And what should I lower? Should I lower my price or add incentives to sell my home faster?
Some of the incentives have become gimmicks with some listings now. It's price. It's all about price. And people get tired of hearing real estate agents say, lower your price, lower your price. So, as a real estate
Sell
agent.
it in 30 days or I'll buy it?
Oh, yes, that's another one.
Oh, I love that one.
Yeah, and that's out there, right? And there's different business models in the industry, and I'm not going to knock the models, but they're not for every individual to take advantage of. So I think that lowering your price, really everything is going to sell. No matter how rough it is, how beautiful it is.
Everything has its price.
Everything has its price.
If your home's being marketed properly and exposed out there, and 30, 60 days have gone by and you're just not getting the traffic, you're not getting the offers, then the first thing to visit is price. Well, maybe not the first. If there are things, the house is not showing at its best potential, and you can do that. But that doesn't matter how nice the whole house is. If you're not getting the people to the door, then that's price related.
Well, I always say to people, when you list your home, you're going to know very quickly in the first couple of weeks, you're either going to get a ton of showings and no offers. you're overpriced, or
Yeah.
you're going to get no showings at all. Another indication of being overpriced.
Yes.
So as long as the home's being marketed properly, you know, you're right, price isn't necessarily the first thing, but it's something that you do need to
Yes.
consider if you want your home sold.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, for the seller, it is personal.
Absolutely, and of course
It's offensive.
it is.
It hurts my feelings, the fact that my
Yes.
house didn't sell at the
Yes.
price that I listed it for.
Because you love your house.
I love my house, and
the
it's
nicest
better than
house
the
on
one
the
that's
street.
down
Yeah.
the street that's for sale. It is the
Yeah.
nicest one on the street,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I get that, and I
Yeah.
think that that's one of those, it's similar to what you said about before you go and go shopping for the new home, you got to sit down and figure out your finances. Well,
Right.
before you list your home, you need to have that frank conversation, you know, does that glass tile in the powder room actually add that much
Yeah.
more value?
Right.
Does the buyer care?
Know the strengths and weaknesses of the home
Yeah.
and what can be done to improve on the strengths
Yes.
and reduce the weaknesses.
It's a tough conversation.
Well, the conversation really, as a real estate agent, you should be going in and telling the client the facts.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. It's about giving them the facts.
It's not the fun part of our job sometimes, because
No.
nobody wants to be told straight up that, you know, they
Yeah.
got spinach in their teeth,
Yeah.
figuratively speaking, and, you know.
Yeah. There's comparables. That's what you base it
It's
on.
our job to be honest and
Yes.
upfront, and to go in and not be honest about it, and perhaps even sell at a price higher than what you think, just to get the listing, does not serve the interests of anyone involved.
Well, and
So,
from the mortgage standpoint, if you price it, and you get that buyer who's
Yeah.
going to really overpay in the market for that home, it doesn't mean it's going to close because it's not
Exactly.
going to get appraised.
that's
So
the other.
oddly enough, one of the most popular questions that
This is my
came up.
favorite too.
One of the most popular questions that came up, which
Okay,
I
I'm
have a hard
waiting.
time.
I'm
Ready for this?
waiting.
And this
I'm
is
waiting.
this is the HGTV question. to be quite
Okay,
honest with you.
okay, I'm waiting.
What color of home sells faster?
I don't even know how to answer that question.
Oddly enough, it's one of the most popular questions asked.
I have to say, I am surprised at that question.
Would that not depend? If you're in St. John, Newfoundland,
PEI,
you probably any
Yeah.
color as long as it's bright.
Yellow, blue, pink.
Yeah, you know.
absolutely.
Mexico.
I would say it depends on the neighborhood. You want to be conducive with what you're seeing in that neighborhood. You
Yeah.
don't want to be all earth tone homes and have yours be the only glowing green.
So let's try and we've got 1 minute. Let's try and
Yeah.
make sense of this question though, from the buyer's perspective. According to some of those shows that you see on whatever
Yeah.
channel that is, I don't want to knock them all, but here's the silliest thing I've ever seen is that the buyer that goes in, oh, I love the floor plan and the space is beautiful and it's nice and open, but I could never buy the house because the walls are pink. I don't
or the
get
garage
it.
door, or the front door.
Like that just doesn't
know?
make any sense.
Red garage or red doors are said to have been more attractive when selling a home. I don't know if it's a scientific study
Okay.
but I've heard that.
Well, it
the red
pops,
doors,
right? It's
it
the Martha
pops.
Stewart effect or whatever
Yeah.
it might be.
But
So we
back
got
to your-
30 seconds. So take a buyer through seeing past some of that. We got 30 seconds.
It depends on the buyer. Every buyer is different. Some have the vision to be able to want to make it their own. Some go in and you really try to say to them, it's a $30 can of paint.
They can't
you know,
be
you can
see
change
past the
this.
hunter green or dusty rose.
We
or-
need to bring
yeah.
you back because we are completely out of time.
Sounds
Joe,
good.
our producer, thank you very much. And Kevin, thank you. Rod, thank you very
Thank you.
much for doing what you do. At
Thank
the
you,
bottom of your
Heidi.
screen, though,
You're very
it'll
welcome.
tell you how to get a hold of us if you got any questions. We'll see you again.
Visit us online for our archive at hittinghome.ca.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you, Heidi.